Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's finally time we talked about VR esports. On one hand, it's the cutting edge when it comes to gaming technology. It provides gamers themselves with a level of control not seen in any other medium, and the devoted fanbase has put in the work to create competitive scenes for its top games. So why does no one watch it, talk about it, or sometimes even seem to really care?
30 seconds left here. 1v2. Has to deal with two members of Vortex. Thief and Yellow Hat. Takes down one. He gets one. He gets two. He gets two.
Keep it racked alive. Let's go.
1v3. Chill Step is insane.
Before we get into today's video, I want to thank our sponsor, ESPN Bet. Look, here at theScore Esports, we know that just like us, you're all big sports fans too. And if you're looking to bet on sports, ESPN Bet is the absolute best place to do it. ESPN Bet is the official sportsbook of ESPN. You can sign up now for ESPN Bet to claim your new player bonus, and for a limited time, also unlock access to 30 days of ESPN Plus to stream exclusive live sports. Download the ESPN Bet app using code esports via the link in the description and get started today. Now let's get back to today's video.
Okay, so there are a lot of out there esports scenes, ranging from the bizarre, like competitive Excel, to the slightly unconventional, like Farming Simulator and GeoGuessr. And these games all have pretty substantial followings. I mean, at least enough for there to be an audience who want to go watch the best of the best compete in person. And this got me thinking about games that I liked, or at least thought were interesting, that tried to have competitive scenes, but failed. Or games that do, but almost no one knows about. And then I started thinking about VR. Around 2016 onwards, developers really started to push to make video games for VR, as more and more companies were releasing their own headsets. As a non-VR person, I always felt like things climaxed in 2020 with the release of Half-Life Alyx, which is widely considered the best VR gaming experience even to this day. Since then, it feels like unique experiences like that have started to slow down in favor for simply having VR support for AAA titles, which can be seen as good or bad. But what about competitive VR gaming? I mean, I feel like if I were to ask my dad, who knows almost nothing about esports, he would probably assume that there's some massive scene with tons of events and viewership because, I mean, there has to be. It's VR. It is the next best thing, right? And it would be true, but also not. VR esports does exist. There's a pretty large list of games, pro circuits, and even live events. It's just that compared to something like GeoGuessr or even Excel, it's pretty damn small. But before we get into why that might be and what the future could look like, what the hell is VR esports? What does it actually look like? To start, let's talk about what is arguably the most recognizable title, Beat Saber, a VR rhythm game where you slice blocks to the beat of a song. Like most other rhythm games, it has a competitive scene, its own communities and leaderboard systems and competitions where that might be head-to-head or in solo runs. On top of that, there's also VR speedrunning, which has also been around for a long time as well, and equally insane and potentially dangerous for reasons I hope are obvious. But these are sort of to be expected. Anything that can be done faster or better than someone else is going to naturally form a competitive scene, no matter the medium. So what about team games? What about our beloved first-person shooters? Well, let me tell you, there is no shortage of VR FPS games that have dropped over the last 10 years or so. And lo and behold, many of those games have their own competitive scene, and even an all-encompassing pro circuit called VR Masters League with a yearly convention. And on that list are OG games like Pavlov and Onward, which are both military sims that have their own tax shooter esports style game a la CS. I mean, they even have their own goddamn Mirage.
You stay here. I'm gonna go. Three main, one palace. One dead, one more ramp.
More recently, two newer games have taken up the spotlight. Breachers, an R6 style game, and Veil, another objective tac shooter, this time with some more original maps and ideas. And listen, even when these games do lack in originality, they make up for it with the undeniable satisfaction you get from physically controlling your weapons and tools in a way that flat screen gaming just can't. Take a game like Breachers, for example. You could argue that it's Rainbow Six Siege in everything but name, but this game is so goddamn intense, even if you're just watching. The act of breaching and clearing while the clock is ticking down was almost made for this medium. And all of these games I've mentioned, plus more, have their own competitions with orgs and broadcasters and commentators and fans who go buck wild, just like CS or any other game. And some of this shit is actually pretty hype. It also kind of fucking crazy to look at.
Frank's gonna grab Chill Step, nice sight hold there. He's gonna deal with more members of Rec coming out now fast. Thief's gonna grab Tarmac, Frank's gonna grab Basil, Thief's gonna grab Clem! They're gonna win the pistol round!
It's 5 versus 1, Natex takes down one, but it's not enough!
And Nate's just dead.
Vortex, make the run of wrecked!
So the question becomes, what's the issue? There's games, communities, live events. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be more low-key and grassroots like fighting games, but that still sounds pretty healthy to me, right? Well, not exactly. I had a chat with content creator, competitor, and broadcast talent Gaijin to get a better understanding of this community and the main issues they're facing right now. And the first thing he told me to look at was the viewership. I mean, these games aren't coming close in viewership, whether it's VOD or live streams, to what we'd see from even some of the smaller traditional competitive games. Hell, even Excel Esports does better than this. Now, I'm not saying that viewership justifies something's existence. I mean, as long as one person likes something, that's good enough for me. Plus, the fact that there's a community that's still trying to push through these issues is very impressive. But more eyes means more publicity, which means more sponsors, which means more money. Unfortunately for VR, right now, it seems like anyone who would care to watch it are too busy actually competing.
The biggest game in VR esports was Echo VR, which is like, if you've heard of it, it's like zero gravity, ultimate frisbee, 3v3, and that game was huge. That game had like tens of thousands of players, like competitive league players, not like monthly active users. Like the monthly active users were leagues above that. And for comparison, I think the stream for the most recent like big VR esports event topped out at like 3,000 people, concurrent viewers. So like we're still not getting like esports viewers as high as there were players in this league.
So now the question quickly becomes, why? Why aren't people tuning in to watch VR esports? And it turns out the answer is much more nuanced, with some obvious reasons and some less so. Say what you will about how goofy it can look at times, the idea of VR esports does speak to this archaic human need. As I spoke about earlier, nothing else in the gaming world comes close to the level of agency you get when using VR, from aiming down sights to throwing utility to peeking corners. It is the closest we have to gamer starring Gerard Butler. At the same time, although it is the future, the barrier for entry is just way too high for VR. To get the obvious out of the way, this shit's expensive. Most of the time, you're going to need a standalone PC or console, then on top of that, a proper headset that can run you anywhere from $400 to $1,000. But more importantly than the price, in my opinion, is the significant portion of the population that just physically can't experience VR, or at least not comfortably. Recent studies are still showing that 40 to 70% of people that use VR get motion sickness after just 15 minutes. Even at the lower end of that margin, it's just way too many people immediately taken out of the consumer pool. So if people can't experience the games themselves, whether because it's too expensive or literally makes them ill, there's a lesser likelihood they're going to care about watching it. Listen, I do think that there is a novelty to VR that people still believe in, but it's not enough.
Everyone who's into it like thinks that it's just like this, that oh, it's the future and it's unavoidable. And I do think it's going to be huge, but I think it's happening much slower than we would like. So I think the VR esports scene is healthy, but yeah, not as big as the community, a lot of the community would like.
At the same time, I'm maybe being a bit too harsh. As Gaijin correctly pointed out in our chat, VR is still pretty damn young by most standards. Companies are already working to make themselves cheaper, more comfortable, and combat motion sickness. Sure, seeing the failure of something like the Apple Vision Pro doesn't seem great for the tech as a whole, but maybe the truth is that the world just isn't 100% ready for VR right now.
Very few people have grown up playing VR shooters compared to who grew up playing flat screen FPS games. I mean, look at the professional Counter-Strike scene. Like you have Monacy and Donk who've been playing this game since they were like in diapers. And it's like we're seeing what that is doing to them, but we're still like so far out from seeing the equivalent in VR FPS esports.
Maybe one day these things will improve tenfold, and VR esports can finally join the likes of CS and Valorant at the top of the competitive gaming world. And until then, my respect does go out to the people keeping these scenes alive, being interested despite all these hurdles. But my question to you watching is this: if VR was completely free and didn't make you sick and had all of your favorite games, would you ever pick it over your more traditional flat screen mouse and keyboard? I think I already know all of your answers, but so does Gaijin. Despite loving VR, competing, and being on broadcast, he is realistic to the overall popularity of VR, but he also has the potential solution. You see, competitive VR isn't just shooters. There are a few solid games out there that are more in the sport realm of things that do an even better job at showing off what makes VR so unique, like the unfortunately now shut down Echo VR. Echo was this zero-gravity ultimate frisbee game that had players flying around this virtual arena, passing, shooting, and smacking the shit out of each other. And its death left a lot of VR fans reeling. Thankfully, there are more games like this coming down the pipeline, such as Orion Drift, which are looking to recreate these more sport-like experiences. And games like Orion Drift may prove to be incredibly important to the future of competitive VR, because its goal shouldn't be to do Counter-Strike but in VR. Nothing is going to top that. It should be to do things that traditional gaming can't. To push the boundaries of what we can do in our digital spaces, and sometimes what's even physically possible.
That's where things get really interesting, where we are just seeing something that is close as possible to a pure augmentation of people's physical abilities with as little video game bullshit put on top of that, where we're just coming up with new scenarios to test like human physical ability that aren't necessarily bound by things like the laws of physics. And that is where I really think will be like VR's inflection point.
My experience with VR lasted about 25 minutes. I pre-ordered Half-Life Alyx, and then I rented a headset, and I was so excited, went home, was at my girlfriend's house, put it on, loaded in, was so excited. 25 minutes later, I thought I was gonna throw up. Took it off in a room with the lights off for like 2.5 hours. Like couldn't physically move, I was so sick. I've been scared to try it ever since.